La primera pregunta sería, ¿Las tinieblas y el alba es la precuela de los pilares de la Tierra? ¿Qué tiene esta historia, la de los pilares de la Tierra, que le hace querer volver a ella periódicamente?
Well, the city of Kingsbridge has come to stand for England. So whenever I write a story about great historical events in England, I tell that story by showing how the event was experienced by the people of Kingsbridge. Kingsbridge has become a familiar place to millions of my readers, and they're interested in it. It's a fictional place, of course. It's not real, but the history is real, and so in a way, it's not really that the pillars of the earth is so important. It's that this town has come to mean something to readers, and so whenever I think of writing a story about some moment in English history, I think now I could set this story in Kingsbridge.
Sus protagonistas tienen ciertos rasgos en común en todas sus novelas. Está la valentía, la compasión, la empatía, un fuerte sentido de la justicia. ¿Son esos mismos rasgos los que más valora en la gente o es porque son poco frecuentes el motivo de esta querencia?
Those are the virtues that I admire. I like and admire people who are smart and determined and who fight against injustice. And I think they're the most interesting people to write about. You can write a novel about somebody who's fighting for himself, to save his own life, perhaps. But it's much more interesting, I think, to read about somebody who's fighting for some cause, whose interests in life aren't completely selfish. I think that makes the person more admirable.
Hay más rasgos característicos en sus personajes, en los personajes de Follett. Por ejemplo, en este caso, las mujeres. Las mujeres protagonistas siempre son fuertes, son determinadas, tienen coraje y tesón, son muy inteligentes, pero luego la historia las ha ninguneado y parece que a lo largo de los siglos su papel fuera pues, el de parir herederos y cuidar el hogar. ¿Hasta qué punto considera que es injusta esta invisibilidad?
There's a contradiction. What people say about women and what women actually do. It's been said again and again in every period of history that women are weak, they are not intelligent, they're too emotional, they cannot make decisions, they have to be looked after. But at the same time, we notice that there are women in positions of power. In the Middle Ages, women could be abbess of a monastery, for example, and in that position, of a nunnery, I should say, not a monastery. As the abbess of a nunnery, a woman could have hundreds of employees and manage thousands of hectares of land and be a great power in the region in which the abbey stood. There were women who were queens, of course, and often powerful queens. Think of Queen Elizabeth I, one of the best monarchs that England ever had. Women were countesses, of course. So when the count would go to war, frequently the countess would be the person who managed the estate. All of those peasants paying rent, the courts, all of these functions of the Lord, which was supposed to be done by men, which women couldn't do because they're so weak and feeble. We look at the truth of the matter and we find that women are doing all these things and doing them very competently. So it's not true that women have never been powerful. It is true that the women I'm talking about are exceptional women because it was difficult to do this and obstacles were put in women's way. So to that extent, I agree with you that that women were silenced, women were not given opportunities, but sometimes women seized those opportunities anyway.
Y luego está la maldad. Hay que ver lo malos que llegan a ser los villanos de sus novelas, señor Follett. ¿Cree que hemos mejorado como especie a lo largo de los siglos o simplemente se ha sofisticado la maldad?
I think there are still just as wicked as the worst people in my novels. If you're thinking about Bishop Winston in the evening and the morning, think about President Putin of Russia. He's just as bad. He's very like Bishop Winston. They're both they both kill people without a second thought. And they do it all not for the good of their country, not for the good of the people they rule over, but to enrich themselves. So so there are still, there always have been and there are still people like that. However, I do see a change. I do see that in some respects, human beings are becoming kinder and less violent. For example, think of the way we used to punish criminals. In the Middle Ages, they suffered the most horrible deaths. There's an example in The Evening and the Morning. A man who is guilty of forging coins is punished in a most horrible way. And there were many more. This is in today's English newspaper. There's an article about they've been digging up Anglo-Saxon corpses, and you may even have read this story. And a woman was caught having sex with somebody she shouldn't be having sex with, and her nose was chopped off. Can you imagine? But we don't do that anymore. So in some ways we've improved. We don't torture animals anymore. Queen Elizabeth I used to love to go to a show called bear baiting. And what the show featured was dogs fighting a bear. And it was about whether the bear would kill all the dogs or the dogs would kill the bear first. And people loved this show, and the Queen loved the show. Nobody in this country would go to such a show today. People would be ashamed to go. The Queen certainly wouldn't go to such a show. So in some ways, I think we're not as bad as we used to be. We've got a long way to go.
Un lector de sus novelas puede llegar a afirmar con rotundidad que al mundo lo mueven tres cosas: el poder, el dinero y el sexo. ¿Hasta qué punto aciertan?
I certainly think these things are very important. You don't come across many people who don't want any of those. You don't come across many people who would say, I don't want power, and I don't want money, and I don't want sex. There might be a few. Well, I suppose what those people do is become monks. Anyway, yes, I think a lot of human life is driven by those three things, but there are other drivers, aren't there? A lot of human beings are driven by the impulse to help others. And that is a very deep and profound influence. Any woman or man who has ever had a baby knows that the impulse to take care of the baby overrides everything. As soon as your baby is born, you become a prisoner. And you have to do everything that baby, who can't even speak, orders you to do. You don't have any choice about it. And that's one of the impulses that drives human beings, isn't it? The impulse to take care of a helpless child. So I guess, and the dramas in fiction are often about the conflict between the good impulses and the bad impulses in life. And the enjoyment of a novel is about how that works out.
No he citado una cosa que también está muy presente en sus historias, que es el amor. En esta novela, por ejemplo, Edgar pierde a su gran amor y cree que nunca podrá volver a enamorarse. Luego está Ragna, que ella desde su juventud pues espera también un gran amor, una pasión arrebatadora. Y es su madre la que le dice que en la vida real las mujeres nos conformamos con lo que hay. Esta idea del amor que tienen los jóvenes, los protagonistas de su historia cuando son jóvenes, del romanticismo, ¿se cura del mismo modo que la juventud? Es decir, cumpliendo años.
Yes, I understand that, and it's a good question. And of course, it's absolutely true that love changes over the decades. Being in love at the age of 70 is not the same as being in love at the age of 20, but it's still being in love. It's essentially the same feeling. It's just maybe wiser, maybe more tolerant, and maybe more grateful.
En un momento de la novela se dice que ningún gobernador es capaz de complacer a todo el mundo de forma indefinida y pese a ello todavía lo intentan con bastante ahínco algunos de los que ostentan el poder hoy en día. ¿Intentar complacer a todos es la vía más rápida para disgustar a todo el mundo? ¿Es un rasgo que definiría al mal político?
No, I don't think it's a bad thing. Nowadays, this is a feature of democracy, isn't it? I mean, we do have a system whereby the person who is the most popular wins. And so everybody who ever gets into power in a democracy is somebody who's good at pleasing, if not everybody, pleasing the majority of the voters. So it's something that we have to live with it, I think. It's the price of democracy. And it does often lead people into kind of slightly obscuring their views and expressing things in a way that will sound right to different groups of people. And that's an aspect of democracy that we all get annoyed with, because we're listening to the politician on TV and we're saying, why doesn't he come straight out with it and say what he thinks? The answer is, if he comes out and says what he thinks, people won't vote for him. So he won't get to do anything. So I know what you mean, absolutely. And the impulse to please everybody is irritating. But I don't see how we can have a democracy without that fault.
Le quería preguntar cómo está llevando este año, cómo se maneja entre tanta incertidumbre en este año que ha sido tan complicado, que nos estamos manejando todos sin ningún tipo de certeza.
In my own life, the days are the same as they have always been. I sit here all day and write, and that has been my working day for 45 years. The evening is completely different. There's no social life. I'm a great lover of restaurants. I think the restaurant is one of the greatest inventions of the human race. You sit around a table talking to your friends, and people bring you plates of food and bottles of wine. What could be nicer? And I miss that. Most importantly, a lot of my family live in the United States, and so I don't see them. I can't go. It would be very dangerous for me to fly to the United States. I might arrive. I might catch the virus on the trip and give it to my grandchildren when I arrive. So I just can't do it. The risk is just too terrible. So, but I miss that. That's the biggest thing for me, is not being able to see them. In terms of the book world, the virus hasn't had as much effect as we feared. People are reading a lot. People are being more careful about how they spend their money because they're a bit worried about the future. But they are still buying books and borrowing books from libraries, and people are reading a lot. So in a way, that's even quite good. I mean, we love it when people read. As a writer, I would prefer they stay home and read and not go to restaurants.
Cuando termina de escribir un manuscrito, ¿quién es el primero a quien se lo deja leer? ¿Quién es su primer lector y qué le hace merecedor de esa confianza?
Well, I give it to a lot of people at the same time. My editors, family and friends, and historians who I pay to read the draft and suggest corrections. There isn't one person. I like to get people's comments. I like people's criticism. And in fact, I mean criticism as well. It's no good to me if an editor says to me, Ken, the book is wonderful and you're a genius, then I say, thank you very much, but that doesn't help me. What I want you to say is, Ken, you're a genius, but chapter 3 is boring. So I do welcome that kind of comment. But there are lots of people. I like it from lots of people, not just one.
¿Cuándo sabe que está listo para empezar con una historia? ¿Qué tiene que sentir? ¿Qué pasa cuando dice, lo tengo claro, voy a por esto, es lo que quiero contar ahora y dedicar los próximos años de mi vida?
Well, when I've written the outline, and there comes a moment when I think I can't improve this anymore by changing the outline. The time has now come for me to realize these things, to make them come alive for the reader. So I have written very short notes about what's going to happen. I might say they quarrel, and the quarrel is in the right place in the story. It's in the right place in their relationship. So what I have to do now is make that quarrel real, make it come alive. I've got to think about what they say and how they feel about what they say. How do they feel about each other before they quarrel and afterwards? All of this. And there comes a moment when I know I can't get any further just making notes. I've actually got to make the thing real. And then I'll be able to see if it's as good as I thought it would be.
Y ya para terminar, siempre hay curiosidades históricas en sus novelas. Hoy en día nos sentimos como muy modernos por haber inventado el poliamor, pero uno leyéndolo descubre que es una cosa muy antigua.
Yes, although usually in the past, a man could have many wives, but it was more unusual for a woman to have many husbands. But although unusual, I believe it happened, and it still happens in the world today. And there is such a marriage in the evening and the morning. I can't prove that people did this in the Anglo-Saxon era. I just think that given that the church was not in charge of marriage, and the church had a very weak hold on the moral life of the Anglo-Saxons, I just think it must have happened. Not frequently, perhaps, but I think it must have happened. What we have now, when we talk about polylove, is much more even, isn't it? It means that a man can love more than one woman, but a woman can love more than one man. So it's much fairer than it used to be. And I guess, if that's what people want, nobody should try and stop them. So long as they're volunteers, the only thing that's bad is when somebody is forced into a relationship. That's the only... Sex is never wicked unless somebody is forced to do it against their will. That's the only time it's... Otherwise, if people are volunteers, people do all sorts of things for pleasure, and my attitude is, so what? Let them.
Pues señor Follett, ya estamos. Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo. Ha sido muy interesante poder charlar con usted.
My pleasure. Thank you. I enjoyed talking to you.